welcome to this afternoon's celebration of the Frontiers of MIT. I'm John Ochsendorf, chair of the steering committee for the centennial celebrations that are going on all spring long. And it's a real thrill to have a lineup of distinguished faculty sharing their intellectual frontiers, and also to have had graduate students outside sharing their work as well. And I hope you got a chance to talk to some of those remarkable students, and I'd like to ask for a round of applause for the students. If you are tweeting this event, we would ask you to use hashtag MIT02139. My wife will explain to me later what a tweet is. And I would like to ask you all to join me in welcoming the 17th president of MIT, Rafael Reif.
Thank you, John. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to John Ochsendorf, Professor Ochsendorf, and to Professor Rebecca Sachs for organizing this remarkable session this afternoon with a tremendous set of MIT talent and ideas. And I also want to acknowledge John Ochsendorf and his co-conspirator. I'm here, that's the right word for her. MIT's Executive Director for Institute Events, Gail Gallagher, for their inspired leadership for the whole Centennial program. So to John, to Rebecca, and to Gail, please let's give them a huge round of applause. Thank you. And to all of you, I understand we have faculty and students and postdocs and staff and alumni and visitors and friends this afternoon. I'm delighted you chose to spend a few hours with us together for this session. Last weekend, we had Campus Preview Weekend, CPW. For those of you familiar with CPW, it's an event we have every year around this time where we invite the students that were admitted to be freshmen this coming year at MIT. So we invite the admitted students. And that's the best way we think we can explain to them what MIT is all about. I've learned that unless you're here, you can explain MIT many ways, but unless you're here, it's very hard to truly understand what MIT is all about. I spent a great deal of time having the privilege of doing that. I traveled a great deal in the US and abroad, trying to explain what MIT is all about. And I tried different things. I try to talk about our mission, advance knowledge, educate students, and beyond that, bring knowledge to bear on the world's greatest challenges and do so for the benefit of humankind. It's quite an honor and a privilege to be able to speak about our mission. I also talk about MIT's impact in terms of numbers of Nobel Prizes and companies and jobs created. I also talk about the people of MIT. That's the most special asset of MIT. These people that are so intense, so passionate, so driven, so curious. Every top research institution, research university has a handful of what I prefer to refer as MIT-like people. Every institution has a handful of them. At MIT, everybody is like them. And I talk about MIT's culture. Excellence, meritocracy, boldness, persistence. You're going to hear a little bit about that. A desire to make an impact and a passion to do good for the world. All that is MIT. But again, one thing is to explain it, and one thing is to be here to witness it. And for those of you in the audience, particularly those of you who are learning to know about MIT, you're in for a great treat. Because the program that Rebecca and John put together this afternoon is going to give you a very good sense of the remarkable work that our MIT faculty and students do. And I would like to warm things up with a little story myself, not about myself, but about a colleague of ours. This is Professor Yanni Llanas. Yanni is a material scientist in our Department of Mechanical Engineering. Back in 1969, when he was a young faculty member, he did something very unusual at the time. he struck a collaboration with a physician, at the time the head of the famous Shriners Hospital for burn victims here in Boston. What he wanted to do and what he did with his collaborator is try to create, try to design, try to develop a new kind of bandage that would help the terrible wounds of burn victims to heal faster. That was his goal. They tried, and they tried, and they tried, and they keep failing. The last material they tried, something referred to as a collagen, actually caused the wounds to heal more slowly. But they never gave up. And in trying to understand why that last experiment failed, because the wound healed, but slowly, they noticed something different. They noticed that the collagen, what eventually was going on is that the tissue that grew back was not the stiff, tight scar tissue, but it was in fact soft, pliable skin. What was going on is the collagen actually